Alright. Oh, welcome everybody. There you go. I feel like a teacher used to have in high school. They used to always just keep quiet until everybody stops talking. Okay. So welcome. Nice to see a whole bunch of new faces. Good turnout tonight. Come inside, grab a seat. How are you? So I'm going to get started by saying we got a freebie to give away, and he's got some more stuff he's going to give away with his talk. We've got an ebook, pretty sure you guys might have seen it on the meetup website. We've got a number draw that we'll do at the end of the evening, and then if you are interested in actually having the ebook, take out a number and we'll do a random draw basically, and whoever wins that gets the code to download the book. Yeah, other than that, depending on time, I might do a lightning talk. So this is something we tried to introduce recently. A lightning talk is like a 10-minute quick rundown of something. So for somebody who's keen on talking but doesn't want to take on the whole half hour and doesn't want to go through all the preparation, and you just want to get something off your chest or get an idea out there, get a bit of validation and so on. Lightning talk is literally a little 10-minute slot that you can just say what you want to say and then get feedback and so on.
It's kind of like a tweet instead of a blog post.
There you go. I was rambling on and you just summed it up there. And then other than that, we're probably going to be moving this to Tuesday evenings. If anybody thinks that's a bad idea, please let us know. We were looking at Wednesday evenings as well, but it looks like that's not good for a lot of people. And the Thursdays seem to be really busy for meetups, or meetups and other events happening around Cape Town. So we're looking at moving it to Tuesdays. If you've got any objections, please let us know. Other than that, I am quite keen to see what Gareth has to say about PHP 7. From what I know, it should be released sometime this year. And I'll leave it to Gareth.
Quick question, please.
Yes.
Your 10-minute quick talks, where do you slot in that?
So, like I say, depending on time, so if Gareth manages to stay within his time slot, then we kind of slot it in maybe just after the break or just before.
No, it's not cast in concrete.
No. It's really, like, you could tell us, you know, an hour before, or maybe even like right before we start, that you got a 10-minute slot, and we kind of just try and slot it and make it work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah. So, Gareth, it's you.
Maybe on that way, you can do that too.
No pressure. Nobody's looking at you. Just, yeah, you guys can get drinks. I think Trent is bringing another chair. I'm sure you can sit in another chair.
No, a couple, just in case. Alright, well, let me get started then. So thanks everybody for coming. Obviously my talk is about PHP 7. My name is Gareth McCumskey. I'm lead developer at savemoney.co.za. For those who did not maybe see the bio on Meetup, we just recently moved to Cape Town a couple of months ago. So I started working at Save Money. Sorry?
Welcome.
Thank you. So far so good. So yeah, PHP 7, those who don't know the details of when this is coming out, it is coming out in October this year. Last month they closed the recommendations for what is going to go into PHP 7, so the final list has been done. They've almost finished implementing a lot of the features already, so they're going to go into beta soon. And basically the whole point of the presentation is to kind of go through what we can expect for PHP 7 when it's released in October. So currently we have 5.6 is out, everyone should know that. That's our current version that we use at the moment, or not if you've got DevOps like I do. But now we're going to be going to PHP 7. So some of you might be wondering, PHP 6 never happened. There were a number of reasons why. One of the biggest ones was that it took the committee for PHP 7 a very, very long time to decide what to put into PHP 6. So what ended up happening was that it was meant to be the big UTF-8 update to PHP, to allow Unicode across the language, make all that stuff nice and easy. Then unfortunately was dropped into 5.3 because they ended up taking so long to decide on all the other stuff and how it's going to be implemented, all those details. So then when the UTF-8 update dropped into 5.3, they just say, basically said we've got nothing left for 6, so let's figure out what else to put in 6, and while they were doing that, all the rest of the stuff for 6 was put into 5.4, 5.5 and 5.6. So there was a lot of documentation lying around all over the internet about PHP 6, and everybody decided that, well, the decision was made eventually to just skip version 6 and go straight to version 7 to avoid confusion. So I don't know how well that worked, but that's what we've got. So we're going from 5.6 to 7. Now this is just a short list of some of the things in PHP 7. Unfortunately, the list is very, very large. And this isn't exactly all the things that I'm going to be talking about. But there's a ton of stuff that's coming in PHP 7. And unfortunately, if I want to stay in time, there's no way I can go through all of it. So I'm going to try my best just to go through some of the really big ones. Alright, so the big daddy of PHP 7 is PHP NG. Essentially, this is a rework of the PHP engine. It basically gives us massive performance improvements on PHP. We're looking, like it says in the notes there, about 1.5 to 2.1 times faster. I've got some benchmarks which we're going to look at in a second. The link at the bottom is where I got those benchmarks. They're very easy to find. You just Google out for PHP NG benchmarks, and that's probably like the first link you'll find. The only downside of these benchmarks is they're a bit old. They were from, as you can see, the date is in the URL from last year. So PHP NG has been in development since then, and is probably even faster now, and it's been implemented into the new PHP 7 engine. So if you do try PHP 7 out, you should be able to test this yourself. So some of the benchmarks that they did, the first one was on, it says real-time benchmarks, so it's not like Fibonacci sequences and artificial benchmarks like that. The guy took actual apps and tried to run them to see what the increases are like. So the first one was WordPress 3.9, and requests per second for that, and on 5.6, and just to mention this is with opcode cache already implemented. So we're looking at about 45 requests per second on WordPress, and PHP NG almost doubled that to 83, which is kind of cool. For those in the know, HHVM, you might be wondering as well what those are. He did benchmark that. And you're looking there at HHVM, which is basically the Facebook version of PHP, was up to 114.5. So you can see NG takes us a lot closer towards what HHVM was. And what about 3.2, however? It crashed. So HHVM isn't a perfect implementation of PHP quite yet. Very, very quick when it works, basically. All right, so the next one he did was for Drupal. I'm just going to go through this quite quickly. In 5.6, there was about 172 requests per second for Drupal. In NG, again, massive increase up to 260. And HHVM was comparably, a good chunk faster as well. So you can see some nice performance improvements on that. And then the last one I'm going to look at is just Symfony 2.5. So 5.6 is 85, then jump up quite nicely. HHVM, just a quick note, you might be wondering why it's so much lower. It's probably because somebody might be using some more obscure function calls and extensions inside of PHP that HHVM doesn't quite implement correctly yet, so that might be why it's a bit slower. I don't know exactly what.
Have you got any figures for Joomla?
No, you didn't have any Joomla figures at the time. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, it is going to increase in real-world applications. In general, it'll at least about 1.5 times faster, which is kind of cool. We really need it. Alrighty, so that is the big one. That's what everyone's really looking forward to for PHP 7 is the performance increase. One of the other big ones that I'm kind of looking forward to is the ability to have scalar type declarations. What that means is that they're going to essentially create for us 4 new scalar types, the end, float, string, and bool. And they're adding an optional per file directive, and I'll show you what that looks like in code in a second. The ability to have strict type checking essentially is what it is. So if you want to have function calls and classes that, not classes, function calls that return and implement parameters of specific types, you can actually specify what those types are and make it strict so that things will just fatal error out completely if they're not correct. An example of that, your first line of your file would have a declaration like that, so your strict types are on. And then it affects, it also, just to clarify, it affects everything that comes after that you call. And that includes PHP built-in functions and extensions. So if those have types that they define and you don't stick to that with strict types turned on, it's going to fatal error out your application. So.
Just a question on that, does that apply to included and required files as well?
Yes, everything after that declaration in that file. It's a bit of a funny system that they've got. Essentially, you put that at the top of the file, and if you include stuff after that, it's going to be type checked. If you put stuff above that, then you're going to error it out because that has to be the first line of your file. So you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
You kind of can't mix them. So. Right, so basically that'll give you the option to do things. Oh, and just to mention that there's another RFC in this that this one is very reliant on. They're reliant on each other. Is type checking on function returns. So you can actually have function return type now in PHP 7 as well, which is kind of nice. So you have more control over guys reusing your classes. You specify that return has to be an int. That one, for example, would error out because the return is a float. Kind of cool. And I hope this doesn't cut it off. But yeah, there you can see as well, you can define the parameters of a function now has also a specific type and will error out, obviously, if it's not. Now, the one concession they've made is what they call a widening primitive conversion. Fancy name for int equals float. So if something is typed as a float and you pass an int, it'll pass. It's no problem. The reverse is not true. You can't pass 1.0. It's not going to be an int because it could be 1.5, for example.
And that's done without costing.
Sorry?
It's done without you having to do a cost.
Doing the cost. I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, if you want something float and you want to convert it to int, you can cast it.
Yeah, it doesn't do the casting. It'll just accept it because, well, it will cast it from integer to the float to make sure that it stays. So, yeah. Like I said, the directive will affect all extensions, so everything that you have after that, and built-in functions. And again, fatal error is thrown if the types are not correct. So that's the type of error that will end up throwing. Cool. Another nice one. We've had anonymous functions for a little while now, a few versions back. Now we're going to have anonymous class support in PHP as well, which is kind of handy. And they basically operate just like anonymous functions do, so you can do things like that, where you can var dump a class that you just create on the fly. You know, to define it separately and instantiate it and so on, you just go ahead and create a new class. And you can extend existing classes as well in your anonymous classes, which is kind of nice. Which lets you do some other fancy things. Like this is something that you might have to do now if you have a logger class where you have to set what your logger is and so on. You have to define the class, create a function called log, and then instantiate it and pass it, whereas now you could just do that. Because all that set logger needs is a class with a function of log. Kind of handy, makes things a little easier. What they're useful for? Basically for things like, we were seeing previously, the quick mock-ups of interfaces, for example. If you've got a interface class, you can now easily implement it without having to define a whole class that implements the interface and so on and so on. You can just quickly mock them up. For unit testing, this makes it a lot easier as well. You don't have to define an entire class that extends your class that you're testing and so on. You can just immediately create anonymous classes. And if for long-term projects that you're going to maintain for a long time, this might not be so good, but for quick mock-ups of apps, extending existing classes that you need to just add a little function to, quick implementation of existing classes is quite nice. You can just extend them, create a new class, and use that, and so on. Alright, one of the other features is the way that constructors operate for certain PHP internal classes. I don't know if you guys have experienced it, but sometimes you'll use one of the internal classes of PHP and try to pass parameters to its constructor, and it errors out, but you don't really know unless you check whether the value is null, or if you catch the error that it's thrown, or something funny like that. It doesn't throw an exception, doesn't do something that's kind of more consistent. So what they've done is they are now restructuring these to actually throw proper exceptions. So you don't have to check for null, you don't have to do all these funny checks, like 17 checks on an F to make sure that stuff is okay. Classes that used to return a null when they couldn't be constructed will now throw an exception. chuck it in a try-catch block, you can now catch if your classes don't build, objects don't build properly. The other one is where warnings were thrown when an object was instantiated as an incomplete object. It didn't throw an exception, so you couldn't quite catch that so nicely. The last one is, this is one of the internal classes that they're also fixing, where PDO row would throw a fatal error, but now they'll just throw an exception. So that one, they're fixing that as well. So just a quick example of the list of functions that they're fixing with that, just so anybody who might use these can see. I'm not going to go through all of them exactly, but yeah, those are the ones that they're busy fixing. Yeah, JSON-D. I'm actually going through this a lot quicker than I expected. All right, so right now we do have a sort of JSON implementation for PHP, JSON encode and decode. The problem with it is that currently they're not 100% free code. So a lot of Linux distributions and so on don't include JSON extension inside PHP for that reason. What this is aimed to do is implement a fully free version of JSON inside PHP so that we'll always have an encode and decode. JSON-D is also a slightly more modern version of the JSON implementation inside PHP, so that it's a bit quicker. But yeah, it's mostly just to bring it in line with being completely free as well for the other distributions of PHP. So we'll always have a JSON encode and decode available. You don't have to worry about whether it exists or not, which is kind of nice. Okay. Yeah, group use declarations. Pretty handy things so that you don't have to do that. You can just do that. So that's one of my bugbears, thankfully. If anybody develops in Symfony, use declarations like that are a real pain in the bum. So having a single line to define all of those is pretty useful things. And means you can also, and this is taken from Symfony, take things like that and turn it into something like that. So it allows you to use compound namespaces, makes things a lot simpler, much more easy to read, much easier to maintain, and so on. It's just a nice improvement. Yeah. All right, so filtered unserialize. Now this one takes a bit of explaining if people don't use unserialize very much. Obviously, you might have an object that you create that's instantiated, is containing data, has magic methods that will execute when it's destructed, constructed, all those lovely things. And then you serialize it and you store it in your database. But then you pull it out of your database and you unserialize it to turn it back into your object. Now it's going to start firing its magic methods again. However, often things that you take and store in your database contain things like user data, which might be very dangerous to have magic methods just suddenly executing. It's a security risk, obviously. So what they decided to implement is to make the unserialized function no longer allow objects created from a serialized string, allow it to execute as magic methods, essentially. So that cannot happen. Well, it can, which I'm going to get to. So obviously they're trying to fix that security concern, so by default, unserialize is not going to allow toString, or all the other destruction methods and so on to fire. Unfortunately, they have an exception where you can pass certain classes that you do allow it to happen. So here, for example, the unserialize will take the string foo and allow, if it's a class of those types, they will still be complete classes instead of PHP incomplete class objects, like it says. So it's a nice improvement for security, but if you want to maintain that functionality, you can by choice do it for specific classes at least. Alrighty, the null coalesce operator, fancy word for shorthand ternary for isset. Another quality of life improvement for us. Basically, you can take code like that and turn it into that. So, yeah, fine. And it works on null, not just issets. So, if we take it one step further, it can be changed as well, which is some good news. So, null would also basically be the false statement for the check. So there the var dump would equal 3 because x is null, therefore y, y is null, therefore z, so z is the output, which is kind of nice. Okay. Yeah. I did not expect this actually to go quickly. You guys are too quiet. Right, but yeah, there's almost, last I counted, I think it was 48 different RFCs that the committee had basically approved for PHP 7, and that are available online to view sort of the description of and what have you. A lot more than I could possibly fit in yet, even if I had put more in, so the expect this to go quickly. Yeah, so and that's not even including all the RFCs that are based on things like the the code repository for PHP and stuff that they maintain. This is about 50 just affecting language changes and so on for PHP 7. So there's quite a lot of stuff. Some of it's really tiny stuff, some of it's big stuff as well. Things like Unicode code point escape syntax. Basically a way to grab a Unicode character based on its integer code, so that you could use that instead of, to get the Unicode character out correctly. Removing all those alternative PHP tags, which hopefully no one actually uses. Yeah, so we can finally get rid of those. Generated delegation, which is another really massive feature that could be a presentation all on its own to discuss, essentially allowing you to run very quick multi-threaded chunks of code using yield syntax, which if you're familiar with Python you might have seen. So that's a very nice feature as well. Yeah, that's coming into PHP 7. So I was contemplating including this, but
yeah. So sorry, are you saying that from here on they will allow multi-threading?
Oh, there's always been multi-threaded. It's just been a pain in the butt. The thing with the yield from syntax is that it very quickly allows you. Okay, I'm going to explain this. Difficult to do with visual aids, but I'll try my best. So essentially, the yield from syntax allows you to iterate through a function that can return multiple values as you iterate through it, and that's non-blocking. So you basically call a yield from, and then the code will loop over and continue to pull out data from the aggregator. It's almost like through an array structure. It'll keep pulling data from. You can even call a function that will keep pulling data until it reaches the end of its counter inside the function. Like I said, it's a little difficult to explain, but it really means that you can run multi-threaded applications without blocking your script, so that it continues to execute stuff from the yield from syntax. It's pretty cool stuff, but yeah.
Does that have limits on how many processes it will allow to fire off in the background, or is that a manual? Do you have to manually set that?
Well, the yield from only executes one at a time. So if you call yield from, it's going to execute that, pull the value from the function, execute that, then yield from again over the same function repeatedly until it gets the end of its, the counter basically reaches the end. Kind of like an array will reach the end of the array, the function will set the pointer to the end of the aggregator.
Yeah.
And it only does that one at a time, but you could have 5 yield froms one after the other, and all 5 will run consecutively, right at the same time. So they'll create 5 separate processes. So there's potential danger there. Obviously, if you do it too much, you could have 50 processes all hogging your server resources. So you need to be careful. But it's a lot nicer than having to call something and you sit around your script and waiting for the next 20 seconds for a response. So very, very cool feature to have. Yeah. So this was just my initial list of stuff that I thought absolutely had to have in. I thought I wouldn't have time for all of it. Maybe I can just drop onto. Okay. One of the small things that is quite nice to know is the multiple default cases. For those who don't know, in switches you could have multiple default points in a switch. That'll no longer be valid. It'll throw errors at you if you try and do that. So just to be aware.
The time zone warning.
Yes.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, at the moment, if you have a vanilla PHP installation, it'll throw you errors in your log files or wherever about the time zone setting in your INI file. If you don't set it, it'll keep throwing errors at you. So it's a real pain in the bum if you do automatic installations of PHP. They're just getting rid of that. So you're no longer going to have that worry. So if you spin up new machines with PHP, don't worry about it. It's not going to throw these errors. Yeah. Okay. So if anybody is interested, thankfully that URL is not very long. It's wiki.php.net/RFC. There's, like I said, there's a long list, and this page essentially lists all the different things that have gone into previous versions of PHP, I think all the way down to about 4. So if you really want to see the history of PHP, that's a nice place to look. In current versions of PHP, you might see things that you didn't know existed, which is a nice way to find out ways of doing things. Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff to look at there. And otherwise, you can also try out PHP 7 for yourself. There is a way to relatively easily do it. You obviously don't want to do it on your dev machine. Otherwise, you're going to break things horribly. It's no way ready for any kind of production use at all. But Rasmus has gone and created a Vagrant box for you to play with, which is kind of cool. So if you know Vagrant, you can just yank out the virtual machine, spin it up, and it allows you to switch versions. So you could actually do benchmarks yourself, things like running PHP 5, and then switch to 7 on the same application, see what breaks, see what works. It's a good way to maybe test your own apps now if you're really keen on upgrading to 7 when it comes out. Probably not a good idea, but you can at least use this to kind of see how things are going.
In your experience, how long do you think before you start to put 7 into production? Do you think it'll be version 7.1, 7.2?
I would wait for 7.1, but unfortunately in my case I don't have a choice. So if I had a choice, I'd upgrade as soon as I felt it was safe. I'd be running 5.6 now if I could on my production apps. But yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about PHP 7 personally. I'm hoping that I can convince my DevOps and sysadmins to get me onto there as quick as possible. On the other side, there are frameworks that are switching to PHP 7 soon. Symfony, I know, is one for 2.7. They're talking about supporting PHP 7, but backwards compatible for 5.6. And then from there on, they're going to be PHP 7 all the way. So if you use that framework, just be aware. But yeah, that's...
What's the upgrade path like? Like, if I wanted to upgrade my current app to 7?
You might, I would suggest you run it Q&A for a while. There are some backwards incompatible changes that they are making. Not a lot. The committee is very hesitant to do anything that is backwards incompatible. But like the unserialized, for example, that they have a voting mechanism that they use to decide which features come into a new version of PHP. And for syntax changes like that unserialized, you need 2/3 majority. And they only just barely got it by 1 vote. So there were some very hesitant people about that change because it could potentially break so much other things that people rely on. But very few backwards incompatible things come into new versions, which is a little painful, but just play around and test for a long time on 7 before committing to it. If you've got an app that is running on 5 right now, basically.
Is there any one thing in terms of innovations coming with PHP 7 that made you sit up and think, gosh, now this is a radical departure from previous versions?
It's the accumulation of things for me. The big one, like I said at the beginning, is the PHP NG. The fact that we're getting such a nice big performance improvement on PHP. The other one as well is things like the anonymous class support, which is very useful. But a lot of the stuff is stuff we've been asking for a very long time, stuff that was going to be in 6, which are minor things for 6, which are coming in now. And it's just a combination of all of them. There isn't anything, one big enormous thing that is making PHP 7 completely amazing.
With regard to the performance thing, is there like a trade-off, or like perhaps a bigger footprint for PHP 7? Or?
I don't know the details of that. I mean, they haven't even finished implementing all these features into code yet. So it's very difficult to tell. Maybe I can actually get online quickly here to show. So this is essentially that RFC page under discussion. We can ignore because they've already finalized theirs, accepted. There's pending implementation items. There are stuff that they are still writing, actually implementing in code into PHP itself. So it's very difficult to see what the footprint is like, but PHP's footprint has never been enormous, and I don't see it really being much more than that.
That's good.
So I don't think there's going to be massive change in that.
The speed improvement that you talked about, and the comparison with HHVM, and that's the reason that they built HHVM was to make it quicker.
Yeah.
Is it kind of bridging the gap?
It is big time.
Do you think HHVM is going to be not as required, and other, like I see Etsy's just moved to it and a few other big players?
Well, the problem that HHVM has, in a lot of situations it's brilliant, in others it's not, because it doesn't it doesn't completely replicate PHP's functionality right now. So that's its biggest drawback. PHP NG does close the gap a hell of a lot, and it's very benchmarks. It's what's the phrase? Lies and statistics. So it's very difficult to tell with benchmarks because you try to look at real world applications, and that's what those benchmarks were that the guy gave. Real world applications, trying to get a sort of better gauge on how things are. Those benchmarks I showed you were obviously slightly old, like I said.
To get when PHP 7 comes out by default that most of the extensions will work. Because PHP has over 150 extensions, whether they sort of bundled, external, or whatnot. So I mean that's the biggest concern. So for example, using something like MongoDB with your PHP application, things like memory leaks and stuff would be a concern. Things like MySQL, Postgres, those drivers would be very well supported. But sort of like non-standard stuff, CouchDB, Redis, something like that, you've got to be really careful because you can run into memory leaks and really weird stuff happening. So. And
that's one of the prime reasons why they put these sort of exceptions into place to be more backwards compatible. Things like the strict type checking, you have to define that. And if you do that and the extensions you use break, well, then you can turn it off. So it gives you the opportunity to get things either working 100% or to enforce, sort of the way you want your code managed. And they've done that pretty much throughout a lot of these options, is have ways to be more backwards compatible and forsake some of the new features that PHP 7 gives you for that. So, yeah.
Cool. Over you. Thank you. You're right. Okay, so we can take a quick break and help yourselves to food and more drinks, and then we'll be back in a few minutes' time for the next one. Thank you, Larry.